Hi, welcome to another episode of Campervan Cooking with a guy, a chick and two bullies. Today we're going to be looking at a recipe called blanketed beef. It's made with a fillet and we're going to coat the fillet in a bread dough. And once again, I'm ably assisted in my kitchen by Quince and Gypsy, our bull mastiffs. Our ingredients for today: we have got 1 cup of tepid water. We're going to be using 1 teaspoon of dried yeast. We've got 3 cups of brown bread wheat flour, some olive oil, which I will be using to coat the fillet in before we put the bread dough around it, some salt, of which we'll use 1 teaspoon, and then our little flour cup, and some Parmesan cheese, which I'm going to sprinkle over the fillet as well, just to give it a little bit of richness in flavor. Okay, let's start. I'm going to take my mixing bowl, to which I'm going to add 3 cups of flour. The mixture that I'm using, I've actually halved the quantity because it's quite a large portion, and the fillet that we're using is just enough possibly to feed about 3 to 4 people. And of course your bread dough will rise. Okay, it's our 3 cups of brown bread wheat flour, to which I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to mix the wheat flour and the salt together. And then we're just going to put that to one side. And we're going to replace it with our other mixing bowl, into which we're going to add the water and the yeast, 1 teaspoon. And then mix that. The water must be tepid so that the yeast dissolves. And that is about it. Okay, I'm going to add the water with the yeast to my mixing bowl. And to this I'm going to add my flour little by little. And what we want to end up with is a dough that is not sticky, but is quite firm to touch. And then we're going to roll it into a ball and leave it to rise. And here we go, just adding little by little. It's a very simple bread dough recipe. It's so simple that even your child of 7 or 8 could do this as well. Now, the fillet of beef that we're going to eventually be coating with this bread dough is not going to be cooked in your conventional oven, because as you know, we are on the road in our camper van. We don't have an oven, but what we do have is our little Knead gas braai, which has a dome that is like an oven, and we have tested the bread dough, so we do know that it rises. So we're going to now cover this fillet of beef with this bread dough and see what comes out at the end. So if we succeed in doing our blanketed beef, where we get the dough to rise and the fillet to cook, we have proved everybody wrong. You don't need an oven in the camper van. You can do just as well with a Knead gas braai. Okay, my dough is nicely mixed in. I'm going to add the last little bit because it's still a little bit sticky. And then I'm going to knead it together. Now, you don't have to use brown bread flour. You can use any other flour, and if you so choose, you can use self-raising flour, in which case you don't need to add the yeast, or plain flour with a can of beer, also very tasty. The beer has a natural yeast content in it, so that will act as your raising agent. Okay, I'm now going to use my hands, and as I said, this dough can't be sticky. It's actually got to be quite firm. We need to knead the bread dough for about 10 minutes. I've done that. It's formed a very nice sort of little ball. I'm now going to transfer this to my ceramic bowl. I'm going to cover it with cling wrap and leave it until it's risen for about an hour. And you can leave it anywhere where it's fairly warm, not hot, but sort of room temperature. It rises quite quickly. And that is the dough for the blanketed beef. Welcome back. We've left the bread dough to rise for an hour. It's looking really good. It's risen perfectly, and we're going to now wrap the fillet that you can see here in the bread dough, and then we're going to be putting the blanketed beef into this Knead gas oven, which I'm preheating at the moment. First of all, I'm going to take my fillet, which I've left a little bit of fat on because it gives it a bit more flavor. I'm going to take a very small amount of olive oil. The reason we're using the olive oil is just to protect the meat from sticking to the bread dough. And then to give it some flavor, because the bread dough is sort of very basic, I'm going to put some just parmesan. We're just going to rub some parmesan on it. Okay, so that's the fillet, which I've now coated. I'm going to just set those aside, and I have my tray. I'm going to take the bread dough and just spread it out. You don't want it to be too thin, but it's got to be big enough to blanket the fillet. And then the fillet, pop that in, and we're now going to close it up. Very much like our eco cooking program, make sure there are no holes in your blanket. And there we have our blanketed beef. Let's pop that on. And now we're going to take our preheated Knead gas oven, and we're going to pop it here. We're going to open it up very quickly so as not to lose too much heat, and pop our blanketed beef on the top, close it up, and that is your blanketed beef. Just to recap on our ingredients, we had 1 cup of tepid water, we had 5 mils of yeast mixed in with the water, we had 3 cups of brown flour. You put the brown flour in with 1 teaspoon of salt, and put the tepid water into a mixing bowl, and then add your flour and salt mixture, mixing all the time. The dough mustn't be sticky. It must actually be nice and floury. Then set aside for about an hour until it's risen. Your fillet is coated with some olive oil and, for taste, some parmesan. The blanketed beef is then laid out, fillet on top, and then just folded in and then cooked in a Knead oven. we're back. I'm going to open the lid now just to check the beef. You can hear it's nice and crispy on top. Move the beef, ready for cutting. Just going to take our Knead cooker and place it on the floor. Let's have a look and see what our blanketed beef looks like. Your fillet is perfectly cooked, slightly pink on the inside and brown on the outside. I'm serving that, this lovely bread with some gravy, and that is blanketed beef with a lovely rich gravy, some baby marrows and some butternut. For this recipe and others, please go to our website www.saroadtrip.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.